A teacher I recently heard of spoke about meditation as the art of choice. And I like this characterization of meditation and of practice in general. Someone who is a friend was recently speaking about an experience she had where she was exposed to a difficult and anger-provoking piece of news, a video, like most pieces of news are, and how this mind state of anger carried into her work day immediately following, where she had received a difficult email and could immediately see her mind and response colored by the conditioned state of aversion that had been set rolling earlier in the morning. And in the Buddhist psychology, our experience is said to arise in keeping with a chain of conditions and causes which move one to the next and also feature numerous feedback loops. But this is the 12 links of dependent origination. So we won't go into it all, but it begins with ignorance, which leads to volitional formations, thoughts and emotions, which leads to consciousness, form and mind, the sense bases, then contact, and so on through becoming and then birth and death. So this is a somewhat esoteric teaching, especially when it's summarized in about 5 seconds, like that. But the thing to point to right now is the fact that before sensory contact, the Buddha specifies approximately 5 or 6 factors which come into play. All to say that we don't encounter the world as a blank slate. What we encounter when we are thrust into a situation or move into a relationship or receive an email is not a neutral world, but rather the world that we are creating for ourselves based upon our intentions and our own particular ignorance. So when the mind is colored by anger, then one finds oneself looking for things to get angry about. And the world that is created is one of anger. And when one's mind is peaceful, then one moves into the world and creates a world which is calm and bright and conducive to awakening in every circumstance. As the key element in all of this is intention, our ability to strengthen and steer our hearts, our awareness, and our minds is paramount. And for all the spiritual niceties of the modern era and vague praise of the spiritual path, unless we have a daily discipline of sitting in silence for a time at least, even 20 minutes, and centering ourselves and strengthening that element of mind, heart, and intention that is not yet colored, affected by, and drunk on the world and our experience, then we can count on the fact that more and more, as the years and decades pass, the world we create will become colored by forces of our subconscious and of our hunger underneath and out of our control. So, what we're doing every day when we sit and collect ourselves for a time and meditate, bring the mind to bright states using loving kindness, bring it to stillness and centeredness using traditional samatha or tranquility techniques, is we are helping that element of intention grow and consciously altering it. And if our trajectory at the beginning of a day, of every day, and if the trajectory of our intention at the beginning of every interaction and every conversation and every obstacle is carefully directed towards right thought of renunciation, of non-harming, of non-ill will, of loving kindness, of awakening, then just as if you begin a journey, even a slight difference in the angle of your direction makes a great deal of difference down the road. And just so, this small redirection of our day-to-day thoughts and lives and intentions over the course of a lifetime will land us in a completely different realm. And how skilled we are at that art of choice comes down to many factors, but some of it at least is how much time we do dedicate to meditation every day. So there are numerous ways of affecting this flame of intention and of awareness. If it's constantly being impacted by the world, it's like a sputtering flame of a candle. The winds of loss, gain, desire to be praised, desire to be liked are constantly blowing and nearly extinguishing it, and it never has a chance to grow into its own strength. This is what meditation practice does, is we let that flame be still in stillness for a time, and on its own it gathers brightness and heat and power, and then we can steer it. The Buddha gives very clear instructions for how we steer this intention using thought. So one of the most well-known suttas, discourses in the Pali Canon is found in the middle-length discourses. It's Sutta number 20 and is called the Vitakka Santana Sutta, which means the calming of thoughts. And in it, the Buddha describes 5 means of dispelling distracting thoughts. One of which is to replace the thought with a better thought or a different thought. The second is to examine the drawbacks of the thought. The third is to ignore it. The fourth is to relax it. And the fifth is to crush it, which is always a pitfall for us crushing Westerners naturally. So we have to hold that one with delicacy. So he gives metaphors for each. To replace a thought, he suggests the image of a skilled craftsman or craftsman's apprentice driving out a coarse peg with a fine peg. And in our meditation, this is easy enough to see. When the mind wanders to thoughts of the past or future or various problems we're proliferating about, one gently and smilingly brings it back to the domain of meditation. And the domain of meditation is one of the four foundations of mindfulness, and generally the meditation object or several meditation objects you've decided on for that session. So depending on what object you feel attuned to and sympathize with, this can be loving kindness. Generally, breath meditation is a very safe bet. And bringing the mind back to this again and again is what allows it to become still and conditioned by objects and qualities of brightness, of calm. Of course, one issue is that when all we're given as a meditation object, and this has been an issue in the West ever since samadhi practice was brought, when the object we're given is simple and not terribly exciting, such as the admonition to focus on the breath just at the tip of the nose and to not control it at all, or to bring only one word to mind. All we're relying on to direct the mind to that, away from all these exciting fantasies of a loved one, an escapade we hope to have, a movie we've seen, is an act of will. Because generally, the breath at the tip of the nose is not as exciting as the next Avengers movie. So, one of the skillful means we employ in a robust meditation practice and how we become skilled is we find ways of meditating that are engaging and interesting to us and broad. So this is the beauty of a robust breath technique, such as that taught by Ajahn Nisabho. We have some books out front for free, such as Keeping the Breath in Mind and With Each and Every Breath, which expound in detail on the Buddha's discourse on mindfulness of breathing, where 16 steps are brought to bear in how you can utilize the breath energy, move it around the body. You can play with it in all these ways. You can brighten the mind, you can calm, you can bleed excess energy down into the ground through the tailbone. You can channel it out through the hands. You can find points of tension in the chest and the belly and soften them. All these things are ways that we learn to play in meditation. Similarly, with loving kindness, you can use a wide variety of images. You can imagine the person you're trying to spread loving kindness to as a child holding their hand, as on their deathbed holding their hand. You can imagine acts of good that have been done to you. You make this fun. And then it's not simply an act of will, which is drawing your attention back to its meditation object, but rather an invitation and a wholesome interest. You have to work with your mind where it's at. Just like you'd work with a second or third grader, you don't tear them away from the computer and tell them to sit in a corner. You tear them away from the computer and give them some arts and crafts for a time. And after they've calmed down, then you can ask them to sit quietly. And even so, we have to be skilled in our meditation in finding the right peg. And I think that the image of the hole that the peg is filling is important, as it implies a hunger that we have. When the mind begins to churn out thoughts during meditation or a day, it's not simply force of habit. Something in us is hungry for some sort of sustenance. And because we have no better sources, because we don't yet know how to cultivate and access a robust sense of well-being from our body and mind through meditation, then all the mind has is these thoughts which it's gone over again and again. These movies that you've watched in your head thousands of times. And I know Ajahn Nisabho recommends asking yourself if you'd pay to see this movie one more time or not. And if the answer is no, then maybe consciously walk out of that theater. But you're going to have to find another good movie theater to walk into, or maybe outside, something like that. Because waiting in the lobby forever doesn't work either. So finding a engaging way to engage in meditation and becoming skilled in that. And in our daily lives as well, acknowledging that there's a deep hunger for joy, for connection, for excitement. And the old habits, these coarse pegs that we have been relying on for so many years, to expect ourselves to simply remove them without giving our hearts and our hunger anything else to sustain itself with is asking too much of ourselves and is relying only on an act of will. So this is where the whole path comes in. We find a community that provides a sense of friendship, companionship, and purpose in line with our highest values. And this allows us to develop wholesome relationships which can hold our heart in this path, even as perhaps we grow a bit more distance from some of the more unwholesome relationships that we feel we're ready to let go of. When we decide to move away from coarse entertainment, sometimes it's helpful to just have a few Dhamma talks on hand and put them on in the car as you drive from place to place, rather than expecting yourself to sit in silence completely. You need to feed these aspects of the mind and heart, but our goal is to feed them health food more and more. And similarly with other activities, consciously replacing old ones with really wholesome gifts of service and other ways that we can brighten the heart and give ourselves that sense of joy and connection. I find that art is a very helpful means in terms of brightening the mind. The second technique the Buddha recommends is to examine the drawbacks and disadvantages of a thought. And the image he gives here is of a young man or woman. Just as you would feel disgusted and dismayed at an unwholesome thought arising in the mind, you feel the same sense of dismay and disgust that a young man or woman would if they discovered that they're wearing a necklace with a dead carcass on it. So that's quite an image. But as we become more attuned to how our thoughts flavor the mind, there does become this sense of when something has a coarse or sticky feel to it. And in meditation, you know that feel. You know the sense of something that has been gnawed on, the same thought pattern again and again, the same argument you've gone over time and again, or something else. And it has a feel of a and frequently the Buddha gives the image of a dog gnawing on a bare bone smeared with blood, but with no sustenance. So you know that these thought patterns provide no real sustenance for your heart. And so you can see that. And over time, as you track what that feels like, then you can slowly become disenchanted with it. Because little by little, you see that it's not worthy of you. And this doesn't happen immediately. Ajahn Chah said that 80% of the practice is knowing we should let go of things and not being able to. But over time, those disadvantages and their echoes of even the simplest thoughts that are unwholesome become really apparent. And similarly, in our life day to day, the same recollection is useful in seeing when certain acts or certain relationships, certain activities somehow no longer feel in keeping with our highest goals. In Buddhism, this quality is called hiri ottappa, which means conscience and concern. And hiri is the sense of, or what is it, conscious and compunction, or wholesome shame. And shame is a shameful word in the English language, sadly. But in this context, it's used rather to imply with hiri a sense that something is beneath us. It extends from a sense of self-respect, of respect for oneself. And more, we begin to discern which things, as we contemplate our highest values in our lives of awakening, of becoming a true servant and vessel for the world and for compassion, then more and more, any action not in keeping with that feels intuitively and emotionally discordant. And there's a sense of disintegration in the body. You can feel a weakening in the body. For me, I know that in the end of college, I had, like many, a sense that my life, although I was doing plenty of good things, wasn't quite in line with my highest aspirations and goals. And there was always a sense of queasiness, almost nausea, around, almost as if a compass needle was pointing just slightly differently. And it was always there. And frequently we begin to discern that sense of wasting our time as we contemplate our highest aspiration, and also attune ourselves more and more to it in the silence of a practice. And it becomes an emotional quality, a salient emotional reaction to any divergence from that pure movement and path. So this is salient in the small things of our lives. The relationships we know just aren't completely worth our time anymore, or the movie we know we don't really need to watch. But you feel it very strongly in acts that depart significantly from our path. And the image the Buddha uses for those moments where morality is really compromised is, morality that is uncompromised, he likens to a clean cloth, unbroken and untorn. And in those moments where our ethics are truly compromised, the image that always comes to mind for me is a nail-ripping white cloth. There's a sense of tearing. So this is how we see the disadvantages little by little. We strengthen the sense of our aspiration in life, and we see when our actions are no longer in keeping with it. And a good way to initiate the sense of wholesome shame, hiri, is to imagine what someone you respect deeply would think if they saw you doing what you were doing. And ottappa is the fear of consequences, which implies the fear of what might happen or the effects of an action, and that comes from respect for others. So these sound quite dour, but in reality, all of these things originate from a deepening and brightening sense of our potential. And as our respect for ourselves and an intuitive sense of the brightness of our mind and the importance of our purpose becomes salient in our day-to-day existence, then any departure becomes something we don't feel attracted to anymore. Because that sense of purpose, of meaning, is what truly sustains us through our lives. And much of this practice is just seeing the drawbacks and what we can't quite let go of, little by little until we can. And having compassion for ourselves, because that process takes a long time. The third way of dispelling distracting thoughts is to ignore them. And this can be helpful in sometimes just, you don't have to investigate every unwholesome mind state that comes by in meditation. Ajahn Chah, when asked if one had to investigate every mind state, said that it's like you're living in a town and watching people walk back and forth. And as you've met many of them already, you don't need to go and engage every single person in conversation. Sometimes you can just let them walk past and know them. And there comes a point where certain stories or narratives have been run over by us again and again, and going into them one more time is just too much and doesn't help anything. So sometimes you can just let them pass and let that person have just move on, and that's enough. If it's a new character on the street, or if the old character is exhibiting some new behavior, then it might be worth sitting down and seeing what their name is, what their history is. But sometimes you can just ignore them, and that's enough. The image the Buddha gives for that is closing one's eyes to forms that one does not want to see. And there's a great use in that recollection when it comes to what we expose ourselves to in our daily lives. How much news do we really need to keep up with on a daily basis? Ajahn Pasano recommends finding one issue which you can truly make a difference with and keeping up to date on that. But then really taking a step back from some of the other things that so color our hearts day after day. As practitioners, we have the duty to prioritize our mind state and our heart as well, and to truly examine that phrase of what it means to be informed enough. Does that mean checking the newsfeed every few hours, or does it mean maybe reading a few long-form articles every week or two and trusting that that will be fine? The fourth means, and we're almost there, is that one lets the mind thought, or the mind state and the thought calm. Just like a running man would think, why am I running? Why don't I walk? And a walking man would think, why am I walking? Why don't I sit? And a sitting man would think, why am I sitting? Why don't I lie down? And this is the most esoteric of the four, and I've heard many different explanations. The one I appreciate the most is the sense that every thought has a correlate in the body, a point of tension. And as one becomes skilled at breath meditation, in developing this robust, full-bodied presence, then each knot and point of tension manifests before the explicit thought does. And if you can watch as they arise, and release those points of tension, then the thought itself disappears. And for many subtle thoughts, one can do this during deeper states of meditation. But for more coarse mind states and defilements, the physical correlate can be very distinct. For example, one might experience a knotting in the stomach with anger or fear, a pressure in the head. And if one can release that, then the whole mind state can calm. Another useful object for this means is the sound of silence, which is a deeply powerful meditation object, where one tunes one's attention to a subtle ringing or hissing that exists just below the soundscape, and which you can become more and more attuned to as you meditate and keep your attention on it day after day. And it has the quality of this constant and vast, stable ground upon which you can rest awareness, and thoughts, when allowed to coexist with it, simply dissolve. A great pamphlet on that is called Inner Listening by Ajahn Nisabho. And him and Longpo Sumedho and others have cultivated this meditation object to the point where they can hear it over everything, power tools, etc. Longpo Sumedho credits it with getting him through many board meetings at the beginning of Amaravati's getting set up, the monastery that he built. And finally, the fifth means of dispelling distracting thoughts is to crush and constrain the thought as a strong man would beat another weaker man down. So that's kind of intense. And I think this is how most of us modern people approach meditation regardless. We kind of have just the fifth technique. So we approach the delicate dove of the breath with a hammer, and then our own defilements with a hammer, and then we shoot our metta rays out at each other. It's all kind of a battle because we are so conditioned to control and to acts of will that it takes quite a long time for us to become gentle with ourselves. So I think with this fifth technique, you can safely assume you're doing it most of the time, or most of us are. I know I am. And maybe not raise it up quite as much. But it does have a place. And there's certain thoughts which are either too strong and too dangerous to engage with deeply, or they, at that time, or they are ones you've just been through. You've been through this fantasy again and again, and there's a place to just say no. And Ajahn Amaro recommends imagining a door closing and just shutting the door on that whole line of thinking. Similarly, there's a concept in Buddhist practice called adhitthana, which means determination. And this is something monastics and practitioners use frequently, which is just the determination to do something or not do something. So I was speaking with a wonderful monk named Bhante Sumita yesterday, and he was reflecting that the first and foremost adhitthana we all should have is for awakening. And then the second is for the second level of awakening if we can't quite make the first one of arahant. And then the third is for the third level of awakening, and so on. I like that. But the most basic adhitthana, commitment that many Buddhists take on, is the 5 precepts of moral behavior, of not killing, of not stealing, of not lying, of not engaging in sexual misconduct, of not taking intoxicants. But what I find most meaningful is sometimes you do need, and you know it when it's time, to use that sword of adhitthana, and just sometimes it's just enough. And there's a place for just saying, I won't drink anymore, or I will not utter an angry word today. I know how this goes. I've been through there time and again, and just making that determination. And I know people who have supplemented this determination by, I believe one person wrote a check to the political party he hated, gave it to a friend, and then said, I think it was a check for $1,000 or $2,000, and then said, okay, if I fail and if I smoke a cigarette, I have to call you and you've got to mail that check. So there are ways around this.